Good afternoon and evening for everybody on different time zones, and welcome to today's College Sports Communicator live webinar presented by our CSC U committee. We're pleased to offer this session to all young professionals in the first few years of working full-time in sports communications and for students interning and aspiring athletic communicators on my favorite word, collaboration. Finding your team on campus and at the conference level. This is going to be a very great session with everyone. We thank everyone for joining this important discussion as our panelists will talk about how to work collaboratively and how to break through working and in tips and in insights on how you as a young professional can gain the confidence in having these conversations and also be presented as a young professional, as someone that knows what they're talking about with these projects. CSC is the professional organization for all those college sports athletic media relations contacts and the creative digital athletic department members in the United States and Canada and those exploring the profession. Our CSCU committee works exclusively to assist our younger members with learning, education, and networking opportunities. And it's so rude of me to start off this panel, but I am Deshaun Bullitt, the Director of Athletic Communications at USC Upstate University of South Carolina, not to mistake of one of our panelists on this. And I will serve as the webinar moderator. Now, for all attendees, please place questions in the Q&A function, please, and we will get to them during the presentation as best as possible. We welcome questions at any time. Just place them in the Q&A function of the Zoom, and you can use this. You can use the chat function to comment, but please use the Q&A channel only for your questions. As a reminder, we are recording this webinar and starting tomorrow on the CSC website on the YouTube page. You can watch it as an on-demand session, and we also offer numerous podcast channels. Now, please invite current CSC colleagues to listen and watch on-demand video too. This would be big for all of us. We've got a lot to cover. So let's go ahead and get it started. First of all, I would love to introduce our panelists. And starting off, we will go with Rebecca Ensing from 3C2A, Assistant Director of Operations. But I'm not going to go any further in introducing her as far as her history. So Rebecca, I will let you to tell more about that.
Sure thing. Thank you. That was a lovely introduction. I appreciate it. Like Deshaun mentioned, I am Rebecca Ensing, Assistant Director of Operations for the 3C2A. Long form of that, for those that don't know, we are the California Community College Athletic Association. We essentially are the NCAA equivalent for California community colleges. So I sit at the association level, and we provide the governing structure and the logistical structure for 112 athletic programs, falling within about 10 sport conferences regionally. My title is kind of just a polished way to say I'm a jack of all trades. As I'm sure a lot of us are familiar with, I do a little bit of everything. As it relates to this webinar today, one of my primary responsibilities is running all of our social media content coordination, etc. I also assist really heavily with championships and our 2 annual conventions. So that's a little bit about me.
So that is one talent on this call. The next person as a panelist that we have is Mr. Bryce Johnson. Bryce, I'm not going to go any further about you. You tell everybody else about yourself.
Thanks, Deshaun, and welcome, everybody. It's a pleasure to be speaking with you all tonight. My name is Bryce Johnson. I'm the Director of Athletic Communications at Guilford College. I came here last year after spending a year and a half at Black Hills State University in the role of Assistant Director of Athletic Communications and Video Content Services. Really look forward to talking about this awesome topic. I've had, for better or for worse, a little bit of experience collaborating with multiple different people, various different universities. And I hope that some of these insights can be very useful to all of you out there.
Talent number 2. There's one more talent. He might not be smiling right now, but he is full of jokes. Chris, tell us more about yourself.
How's it going, everybody? My name is Christopher Mora. I'm the Assistant Director of Design over at the University of Southern California. I don't think there's ever been a debate between University of South Carolina and University of Southern California, so USC is fine. Before that, I spent a couple years in San Diego in Major League Baseball with the Padres. And then before that, I got my start over at Cal Baptist University hanging out with Sammy Wellman, who is hiding right now. But yeah, I was with her for a couple years and realized that college athletics is kind of where my heart is. Yeah, just looking forward to talking shop with you all.
Well, First of all, Chris, you're probably right. USC and University of South Carolina probably do not get confused. But since everybody is warmed up, I will start off with a question for everyone on the panel. Starting off with, some schools have internal graphics or video or marketing people while others don't. But how do you start building relationships or strengthening relationships with people both in your department, across campus, or within the conference? Rebecca, I will start with you.
Sure thing. That's a loaded question in and of itself. And if I were to put maybe like a quippy one-liner on my advice, I would say just chat people up. We're all humans before we are anything else, and I feel like a lot of um, the strongest relationships I find myself building and nurturing over time are the people that I got stuck with for 12 to 14 hours on a championship day, right? Working alongside them, trying to figure out how they operate, what role they play, what their talent is. I like to make sure I'm not ever approaching anyone in a way that I'm only ever asking for something. I want to know the human first. I love getting to be on site at championships and figuring out what makes people tick. And I think when you approach people with sort of a genuine interest in who they are as a person, they're a lot more giving. And a lot more forthcoming with what they can provide for you. And then over time, keep up with that, right? Don't let it turn into just transactional, like keep it human over the course of the relationship. But I try to do my best to live by that. Approach everyone as a human first and just chat people up, have conversations, because you never know who you're encountering, who you're going to come across.
Preaching to the choir. I love that. Bryce, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I actually share a lot of the same points. I've been at schools in both those situations where we have internal graphics and video people, and schools where we don't. So at Black Hills State University, that I was in that role. I was in charge of our video production as well as our video content. So, and then here at Guilford, we kind of do them all as an athletic communications department ourselves. I talked to a lot of people, kind of like what worked, what didn't, some former colleagues of mine. And, one of the things that came up was that they emphasized was that I established these relationships early, whether it's a coach or someone at the conference level or someone across campus. Introduce yourself, connect with them early, schedule sit down, start your relationship ASAP, and then, like she said, cultivate it, maintain it, get to know them personally, not just professionally. One way of doing that, establish common ground, whether that be through a passion for just baseball, Major League Baseball as a sport. With one gentleman at Black Hills State, it was through, I'm a Red Sox fan, he was a Rockies fan, so it's through the 07 World Series. With someone else, it was through our passion more professional, through our passion for video streaming. When I start to establish relationships with coaches, I schedule a sit down with them, and I really want to get an assessment of where they're at. Where do you see your program going? What has worked in the past? What would you like to see us to improve? What would you like to try that's new especially when I'm getting to a new university, or alternatively, when a new coach comes in? The most important one of those bunch is that first question. Where do you see your program going? And off of that, what can I do in my role to help you get there? One way to keep and cultivate that relationship is I always have a preseason meeting right before their regular season starts, and then I schedule one at the end of the year to assess what went well, what could have been improved, similar kinds of questions to make sure that we're on the right track. And this is something I also do with those that I lead. I have several meetings throughout the year. So as you grow as leaders, as you grow as young professionals, start to lead young people yourselves, these are questions that I also ask. Where do you want to be, and how can I help you get there? From the conference level, when I got here to Guilford, one thing that I made a point of is to reach out to the conference, the communications guy, JJ Neckelhoff here at the ODAC. He's fantastic. And I got really lucky because Guilford's here in Greensboro, and it's where we host our ODAC swimming and diving championships. So we grabbed lunch and we discussed a lot of the same things. What did Guilford do well prior? What could we improve, etc. Across campus, I think building a relationship with university marketing is critical. What we can do as an athletics department to help them, what we can do to elevate it ourselves together, right? It is very easy, I feel like sometimes in athletics, to get kind of caught in a vacuum, kind of caught in your tunnel vision. So remember, and I definitely think it's true at all levels, but I especially think it's true at smaller schools. What's good for the goose is good for the gander, right? Elevate yourselves together. So, what's good for athletics is good for marketing. What's good for marketing is good for athletics, and everyone benefits. Now, you got to be careful not to overpromise early, which if we get to one of the side questions later on, I'll kind of emphasize a little bit. But I think at the end of the day, we're communicators. So let's communicate. Let's get to know these people. Let's talk to them. Let's talk to them in person. And then we go from there.
Wow. Okay. First of all, there was a line that you said. I'm gonna need that put on one of my t-shirts. I'm just gonna tell you that. Chris, you are in graphic design, so I know you've had to build relationships just so it doesn't seem, as what Rebecca said, always being transactional. How can you touch on that topic as well?
Yeah, well, everybody wants to talk to the graphics guy at some point or another. So it is kind of an interesting perspective because everybody, I look at ourselves as not necessarily at the bottom, but we kind of feed up, in our org chart because everybody needs something, whether it's the athletic department or sorry, the AD, the marketing department, sports information, departments that are across campus. But kind of more along the lines of what Bryce is talking about, the sit downs that we do with our coaches, essentially to establish messaging. That's something that has been big for us this year. We've scheduled however many sports we have, I don't even know, 22, whatever it is, 22 different meetings with 22 different coaching staffs and essentially trying to get down not just, the kind of the bare bones of what they need from sports info, but also what they want from a creative standpoint, whether it's, we want to focus on our championships or we want to focus on, I'll use an example, women's basketball. Like we have Juju, we have, this star-studded roster. We want to kind of put them at the foresight while also kind of bringing back our legends. Every team kind of strikes a balance in that sense where you have to really cater to their specific needs. But then also just from a individual standpoint, I mean, we do stuff with our ticketing department, we do stuff with our development department. All those areas require some level of maintenance in terms of relationship building. And a lot of it does go with what Rebecca and Bryce are saying. We're just talking to them, like we'll be at a basketball game and I run into one of our ticketing guys and we just chatted up for 5 minutes. And at some point, some topic of, hey, we have this ticketing package that we want to do and we need a shirt, we need, whatever. And that's kind of the establishing conversation for a longer term project down the line that maybe at that point in time, I'm thinking, I don't really want to do this. But then once it starts coming together, it's like, oh, it touches all these areas. And I think every conversation that we have, especially in a work perspective, is going to be transactional in some way or another. That's just kind of what it is. But you kind of get to pick and choose at some point what transactions you want to do. And that way it doesn't feel so forced. I think it becomes a little bit more organic.
And coming from your perspective, I do like that you say that because everything is going to eventually turn into transactional. The two words that really stuck out from everything that all of you said was balance and communication. And honestly, the first thing when I took my job at Point University as my first gig as a SID, the first thing I really want to do with 19 sports was get to know every single coach because I'm like, look, I'm going to have to work with you. We're going to spend a lot of time with each other. I don't want to just feel like it's a work relationship. Like it can be that, but I would also like to figure out how can we collaborate? What can I do to be a part of your program and promote your program in the best light? So the fact that all of you have the same mindset to want to have that same relationship, it takes time. And sometimes depending on your personality, whether if you're more like introverted or if you're extroverted, it does depend. But I think because the coaches do depend on the communicators so much, whether it's from a graphics perspective or if it's from just everything. Heck, I mean, Chris, you might have a situation where Juju breaks another record or something. You got to put a graphic out on the spot. Or Bryce, you might have a situation where two student athletes have broken records in the same night. or Rebecca, I mean, heck, dealing with conference championships, there's no telling how many times you've had to probably be on top of every single thing as far as social media work. But the fact that you probably have the relationship with so many people, it helps because at the end of the day, once you do it, it's like, you know, you didn't have to do that, but we appreciate you did that. So I like that all of you talked about balancing and communication. That really helps out a lot. So, Bryce, I'm going to kick it to you, and we're going to go into this next one asking about if someone doesn't have an internal creative person, how do they collaborate with someone on campus to fill that void, and what other projects could on-campus partners help with? I know with you being on a Division 3 level, sometimes you might have to try to figure out who can fill that void, and you don't want to be too spread thin. So just can you dive into that a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question, Deshaun, because I have been Division 2, Division 3 my entire career. So even as an undergrad, I went to a Division 2 school named Franklin Pierce University, and then for my graduate assistant position, I was at a school called Roger Williams University, which is a D3. And actually, my first point and the first place where I like to look to kind of fill these voids is how I got my start in athletic communications, is look at student workers. I think you'd be surprised by how many really, really talented young people are on your campuses if you look in the right places. Those that have interest in video production, those that have interest in taking photos. You know, like I said, I was one of those kids. I was driven, I was passionate, I was skilled. And it's how I first got involved in athletic communications. And, I just started, as a student worker, and I headed up our video team doing highlight reels and stuff like that, and grew in that role over my following 3 years as a student worker at Franklin Pierce. So there's that part. And at Black Hill State, the one thing that was mentioned by my former boss there, Riley Baker, he said one of the best things that we did was an openness to collaborate, right? Is an understanding that you're not, as a young professional, you're not a finished product, right? You're still growing together. So with that willingness to collaborate, I did reach out to these other departments. I reached out to a gentleman named Scott Lemon, who was in our marketing department, who was fantastic with video. He had more experience than I did. He actually served in my role several years prior. And so he had a lot of insights on how I could develop my skills. I learned a lot of tricks of the trade from Scott. He even helped us with some of our video shoots on occasion. So he was fantastic. We reached out and we collaborated with our photography department in, and we used their photography studio for like our media days and such. So, we look good, they look good, everybody's happy. Making sure that you establish those relationships, you're respectful and courteous, but it comes back to what I said in that first response. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. What's good for us is good for them as well. One other department at Black Hill State I really collaborated with was our IT department. They helped a lot with our streaming. They helped me get us up to speed, but also I helped them because they ran our graduation stream for the university, and I helped them providing student workers and myself to help with those productions. So develop these relationships because they're so important. Not only are they connections, not only are they potential references, but when you're at your school, then when you stay at that school, they're more likely to respond when you call in a favor, when you call in a chit, right? They're going to be more likely to be willing to help you in response if you need it. Some other projects to answer the second half of that question, what other projects could on-campus partners help with? We've had a ton, both here at Guilford and at past schools. Days of giving, fundraising days, other events, what's good for, we put out stuff about these events and we reap the benefits at oftentimes. At Roger Williams, we developed a podcast series, Hawk Talk. Well, we did that in the actual radio studio on campus. We developed that relationship. We had a great rapport there. Media days, like I said, with the photo studio at Black Hill State. One thing here at Guilford that we've been doing that I work very closely with marketing on is written student athlete spotlights, feature stories, because it gets to It gives us a chance to showcase what great things our student athletes do, because our student athletes, they're of course still students. And so it reflects well on the school as well. So, it's going to vary school to school, because you'll notice, of those examples I just used, there was different examples and I was at different schools for those. So every school is going to be different. It starts with having those initial sit down conversations. Hey, what can I do for you? And what can you do for me? And how can we grow together? The other thing I would like to note, especially at small schools, it's not a project per se, but these relationships could allow you to potentially borrow and utilize equipment in other tools. So, for instance, here at Guilford College, we're able to lend the photos camera from our marketing department because it's better at capturing media day photos than the one that we have in department, and it's really helpful and helps us in that way.
And I can really attest to that, honestly. One, for the student worker perspective, just because some of my favorite student workers that I've come across were just super passionate and just wanted to be involved. And at first, I was like, okay, well, what exactly do you want to do? But some people just want to be involved, and once they figure it out, they'll figure it out. And then from building relationships with IT, I mean, I could I probably can write a whole 2-page article about how much me and IT had a great relationship, just because like there'll be situations where we might have needed speakers. And I will go to IT like, hey, do you have any other speakers before we spend money on any kind of speakers? Just because you would rather see what we can probably do for each other. Or there's a situation where I was traveling on the road and I needed a hotspot. They had a lot of hotspots in their office. They gave us one. It worked out because you know how it is when you travel. Sometimes you don't have any Wi-Fi, and the hotspot is your best friend. And even from a Hall of Fame perspective, I mean, we all had to work together because we were using a neutral site type of location, and we wanted to broadcast it. They wanted to be involved in it. So we all collaborated in that perspective. And so I do love that you spoke on that, because I think people, especially at a small school, people have to understand that it takes a village to really get certain things done. Even if it's one day, it takes a village. Speaking of village, we can go ahead and move on to Chris, because Chris, sometimes you might have to be your own village, but guess what? You also have to deal with deadlines from other people. So when working within an department, how do you collaborate to see a project come to fruition, and how do you communicate to make sure things get done? I know that for your side, you might be big on deadlines and people might be big on deadlines for you, but how do you really communicate that situation for others?
Yeah, so I think importantly before all that is making sure that the request understands that there's infrastructure in place for us as designers, right? We have uh, software tools, whether it's project management systems like Basecamp, that's something we use here, but there's others like UpClick. Um, I'm blanking on the others right now, but even something as simple as organized email and a spreadsheet system, that seems a little bit more hectic, but even something like that, just a system in place to organize requests. Because I remember when I was first starting off, a lot of it was just writing stuff down on a piece of paper, and then another person would come in, I'd write that down on a piece of paper, and I'm not an organized person at all mentally, so things would just get hectic all over my desk. Um, and then making sure that the approval process is organized as well. My personal approval process after we get certain revisions done, I can never go more than 3 rounds. If it gets after 3 rounds of edits on whatever the project is, in my opinion, that we're kind of backtracking, because at that point we should be dwindling down a bit. So once we get to 3 rounds, then I say, okay, we're gonna meet in person, we're gonna see what is missing here. Now granted, there's certain exceptions to that, because there could be, let's say, the difference between a social graphic for a milestone versus, I don't know, something I'm doing for baseball right now. We're building their new stadium. Like, those projects are gonna be much different and have different expectations than just like a web banner or something like that. But I think the big thing is just managing those expectations. A lot of people just don't know what we do. They don't get it. That's just kind of the reality. So you have to kind of force that into them, and make them understand that it's not just putting out a request for a graphic, and also kind of training them in a way, uh, instead of just requesting the graphic and saying I need X project and that's it. It's saying, okay, well, specifically what information do you need on it? When do you need to buy? What dimensions do you need it with? Do you need certain assets such as a logo, such as I don't even know. Is there a digital asset that needs to go with it for marketing purposes, right? Is there a shirt promo? Is there anything that you need tangibly that's on there? Because a lot of times they'll forget to give that to us, and then they'll come back saying, "Oh, we need to make room for this," and that would obviously been much more helpful if they were giving that to us on the front end. All of that, and then you could start designing whatever it is that needs to be done.
So I did have two follow-up questions. So the first one is, if you are at a standstill on a graphic, say this is attempt number two and y'all are kind of on a standstill, how do you come to that common ground to just figure out what the vision that both of you are looking for? And then the second part of the question is, if someone does not know exactly basically what you do and how your world is, how do you get to that point to get them to understand?
Yeah. So the second one is a little bit easier to answer because a lot of times those people don't really know what they're looking for. They just kind of want something that looks cool or something that looks, decent enough to post. So I would say 99% of the time in those cases, I just send something out and they'll just say, that looks great. Thank you. Now, in the first portion of your question, I would say those conversations tend to happen with information. Sometimes, whether it's an SID, whether it's a social person, whether it's a marketing person, they'll want just this overload of information. And then the designer will tend to want less of that. So there's always this conversation of what can we take off, what can we not include, because from my perspective, it's the text is not going to show up well on a small screen since that's all we see. From their perspective, it's well, the information needs to be on there, and it's too important to just be a caption. So there's always that little bit back and forth. I deal a lot of that. Women's basketball is one of my main priorities here, so me and our social team, we always kind of go back and forth, but that collaboration, well, that I would say sometimes starts off as arguing, but turns into collaboration and ends up being we always get a good middle ground after those conversations happen.
Perfect. I think it makes a lot of sense, and I think it is super important for anyone who is watching this and it will watch this for people to understand how we can get others to understand our world, because sometimes it's like we're in our own little mountain and people do not understand that. So there was a word that you said, which was organization. But with that, I'm going to kick that word to Rebecca, because Rebecca, championships and organization is two things that you deal with a lot. So with being with 3C2A, being that those championships are at various locations, how do you make sure that things run smoothly, and what kind of communication does go out beforehand?
Yeah. Organization, I think, is a key word across the board, no matter what we're working on or doing. Um, and first and foremost, it's absolutely a team effort. I don't do anything by myself, nor does anyone else, right? And I think that's important to mention. Um, my office is only a team of 6, right? And so we are tiny but mighty, and so a lot of support comes from our our hosting sites. That's everything from security to logistical to their SID. Like, there are so many different moving pieces on our hosting sites. There's a lot that they shoulder for us, especially because we cannot physically be there all the time. It's rare that we even get to do a site visit ahead of a championship, right? We're really just doing virtual planning calls leading up to a championship, which makes things really difficult. Um, in terms of communication that gets sent out, those planning calls are really important. There's a lot of people that are involved in getting those calls together. Our director of championships makes sure that he's bringing in as many people as possible. That's everyone from our video broadcasting all the way to SADs or our sport representatives for sort of our legislative team. There's a lot of different people that get involved and have a hand in the cookie jar to make sure that everything's running smoothly. Um, and then in terms of like direct communication, we're trying to also vet media, right? Make sure that our media list is not just some individual student athlete's social media manager wants to sit on the baseline at basketball. We don't have the space for that. They need to go sit in the stands, right? So trying to make sure that we're vetting media that are trying to get passes, coordinating people like Sammy and the rest of our SIDs to be on site to help work stats and tables and write copy and like get all of the different moving pieces that go in behind the scenes. So again, I think it all just kind of comes back to it. It's a team effort. It's a massive, massive team effort across the board. And there's no one singular person that does it alone. And I think it's important to remember to lean on the rest of your teammates. Everyone is sharing a common goal at the end of the day, which is providing the most exceptional student athlete experience that we can. That has to be number one for everyone. And so remembering that that's what we're all working towards, despite what our individual responsibilities might be, is probably key to making the whole process work.
And so following up with that, what would be your mental approach going into the championships just to make sure that you're hitting everything on that checklist? And how do you really stay on top of everything?
Yeah. I'm a big lists person. I've got to have a million and one lists in front of me. My notes app is full of everything from social captions to every single person I need to speak to on, day of loading in. A lot of times it's my director of championships and I that are traveling to state championships, unless we've got a multi-sport weekend, and then, we're kind of trying to divide and conquer. Um, and I've got my calendar is packed, my notes app is packed. I've got both a journal and a tablet that I've got with me everywhere I go. Like, I think I'm very much a visual person. And so in order to stay on track, I've got, all of my lists, names, emails, to-dos, etc. It's the only way I keep my head on straight.
Yeah, I definitely understand that considering that I just had to carry my iPad today with my two notebooks, my little book with my calendar and lists and to-do lists. So definitely get that. So I want to stick with you on this question. This is going to be an open room answer for everyone. So there are times where there are requests that are given to us and we probably can't meet those requests or we just can't commit to those. When trying to keep a good relationship, especially being a young professional, how do you maintain that good relationship? But how do you also set that boundary to let people know that maybe we can't meet that request? So, Rebecca, I'll start with you and then we can go around with this
Sure.
one, 'cause I think we can all speak on this.
We absolutely can. And I probably have a little bit of a unique perspective on it, right? Sitting at the association level, there is a certain level of authority that comes from this office, right? Like there's a lot of times I'm not supposed to feel guilty about saying no to things, right? And so I think I might have a little bit more privilege in that vein, to and let no stand for what it is. Um, but on a separate level, I think it's important to remain respectful, right? And honest. Like at the end of the day, if it's your workload, then being honest that I'm sorry, I can't commit to this. Like I'm at capacity right now. There's nothing wrong with that. And the truth of it is you're gonna upset people. Like people don't like being told no. So getting comfortable with upsetting people is important, because you're not going to please everyone. That's never going to happen. Um, I had to that pretty quickly, especially as a woman, right? My tendency is to people please 100%, 24/7. And I just can't do that. I would break, I would fall apart. Um, Obviously, if your immediate supervisor or your director is coming to you with some, um, that's a you should get it done. You probably shouldn't be saying no, but if it is a workload issue, again, be honest with them and talk it through with them. Um, but I would say if it's going to be a compliance issue, if you're at capacity, it's okay to say no. A lot of people will move on and get over it. And if they do push back, try to work through it, try to collaborate, maybe bring in some sort of, um, mediator, right? Not in an official sense, but like bring in a supervisor or another party that can kind of help bridge any gaps that might be kind of opening in communication. But yeah, it's okay to say no. It's valid to say no because sometimes you just can't get it done. And if you piss someone off, you piss someone off.
Hey, the number one thing in this business is sometimes you're not going to be able to please everybody. And it's okay to say no. I'm glad to hear that. Glad to hear that now that I've been working in sports information for a bit now, because at first I did not like telling people no. So glad you said that. Chris, I want to turn it to you. Say if there's an example, I want 5 graphics today. I want 5 graphics. I want 3 of them specifically for one sport, but I want another one for a facility. How do you manage that relationship to tell me no, but also making sure that we still have a good relationship? Like, how would you handle that scenario?
Yeah, I mean, compromise has to be part of the equation. In that scenario, I'd be like, all right, you'll get your 3 graphics today. That facility thing is going next week. Like, that's just what's happening. You probably knew about that. Not you definitely knew about it before today. So we we can push it a few more days. That's honestly the kind of conversations I end up having. It's a little bit more direct, because no matter what, they're gonna go to you, even if they leave mad. And a lot of times they don't really get mad. They just kind of are upset they didn't get what they wanted that day. Um, to be a little bit nicer though, it's just you talk with them, you figure out, okay, what can we get done for you today, that it's not going to be all of it. um there are scenarios like that where we want this graphic suite. I'll tell you one specifically that happened not too long ago. It was a specific sports, like, I'm trying to be vague because in case this is listened to later. It was a specific graphic, right? And there was a multi-layered facet to it. um Probably didn't need to be done until 2 weeks prior, or 2 weeks after, I mean. But it was requested on a Friday night for a Saturday morning. And by Friday night, I mean like 8 o'clock. And I see the request come in because I have it on my phone, and I'm like, okay, well, I'm gonna get a text saying, hey, apology, never got the text. So I'm like, okay, well, let me reach out, talked it out, and okay, so they don't need it tomorrow morning. They really probably need this Tuesday. But that doesn't, my first initial reaction is, yeah, I'm just not going to do that. But once we had the conversation, then you really figure out, okay, they need some of it by Saturday morning just to kind of show it off to whoever is going to be seeing it, because they're going to be there in person, and the rest of it can go to. So it's like, all right, I'll get you one piece of it tonight because I'm nice, and then the rest of it will get done later the following week. So a lot of it is, in kind of like I said earlier, is just managing those expectations early on so that they know not to do that. Sports information is kind of another animal, because you guys like, stuff pops up all the time, right? And I tend to be a little bit more lenient with those requests, just because I know that a milestone will pop up, or something significant will happen in game, and so we certainly try to be equipped for that. We have the luxury of having a group of interns that are all rock stars, and so we'll have some coverage during most of our athletic contests, and that way, if anything pops up, then they'll be able to go to them, or if they come to us, then we'll just kind of distribute the work that way. But yeah, I mean, it's a repeater, but yeah, managing those expectations so that those requests don't come in that way. Just kind of hammering it home throughout the year, and when new hires come, kind of do the same thing with them, and really just kind of cultivating those relationships, kind of tied in back to the earlier question, just really almost having the relations so that they feel bad to do it, and that way they don't feel that the comfort to do it anyways.
So I do like that with the example I gave you. I gave this crazy request. You had a great response of how it should be responded to, because we've all been in situations where we've gotten a request and it's like, oh, you're serious about this. Like, you're not joking. And it's you sometimes you don't know how to answer it. And I'm gonna turn this one to Bryce, because Bryce, again, man, you work with a lot of sports, you've dealt with a lot. I know, turning being in sports information, you've probably had to deal with those situations. How have you dealt with it from having so many different requests, some you may not be able to commit to, and how do you manage that? And how do you just go about that? What's your process?
Yeah, I think Rebecca and Chris make some really great points there. It stems from, that mutual respect piece. Clear and reasonable, reasons. Hey, here's why I can do this. Hey, here's why I cannot do this, right? Um, Establishing fair boundaries is not a bad thing, early on. So for instance, this year, one of the things that I stayed pretty staunch on is I don't want to do media days on Sundays, right? It's usually the one day off, especially at D3 school, it's usually the one day off we have a week. That's not true right now because we have softball in season, so they'll play on Sundays, and there are some Sundays where soccer will play in the fall. So, but especially like leading up to the year, like that last weekend off before we have games, coaches would be like, "Hey, can we do our media day this day?" And I'm like, "Can we try and find a different time?" Because it's our last day off until mid-September, right? Due to the game schedule. So I think establishing that mutual respect and having clear and reasonable backing behind your decisions and your requests is perfectly fair. And I think the other thing is when you're working with other departments, particularly across campus. So the example I would like to use is like the student athlete spotlight, write-ups that we've been doing here at Guilford. Well, there have been a couple of months where it's like the workload with what we've had going on, it's just been too much, right? I haven't been able to do it. However, I communicated that as early as I could. And I communicated it early, and I was able to provide the story I was going to write and the athlete I was going to write about to, my colleague in marketing. And as a result, he was able to make alternative plans, and he was able to write the or write the student athlete spotlight instead, so that we maintained that continuity from month to month that we were striving for, but also it wasn't overexerting for me, it wasn't overexerting for him because I communicated it early. The other thing is, when building that mutual respect, I think, presence is really important. Like they're gonna understand more if they see you visually and they see you putting in the work. I'm not saying you have to be the first one in, last one out in the middle of July. That is not what I'm saying here. But because that's going to lead to burnout real quick. So within reason, kind of just make sure you're putting in the work and make sure you're very present. Because I think sometimes it can be tough for coaches and for admins, especially once they get in season. They get very narrow-minded. They're locked in on what they've got going on. But if you are present, if you communicate, you have and continue to cultivate that relationship with that coach, with that admin, the more likely you are able to come to an agreeable solution together. And I think that's the best way to be able to handle those situations.
Okay, that was something that stuck out to me, and I really have to ask you: have you been really requested to have a media day on a Sunday before?
Deshaun, not only have I been requested to do it, I've been requested to do it multiple times this academic year. You have no idea.
I only asked that there was one time there was this one, and there was the only time I did it, where we did a football media day on a Sunday because that was the best day that we can give them. And it was only because they had a scrimmage the day before. I said, I'm not doing it that same day. And I was like, we'll do it this day. And I'm glad you brought up media days, because that is something from a small school perspective that gets put on us, and we'll have to take care of it. But sometimes they'll want it on the craziest times ever. And the boundary that I had to really set and I had to stand on, especially as a younger professional, and sometimes, which this is going to go into my next question, I'm really excited for this one, is trying to present myself as someone around people who are much older than me, who probably don't care to listen. But in a big meeting, I said, we will never do media days close to your game day. Like if game day is going to be 3 days out and the season is about to start, there's no reason you should be requesting to have media day 3 days before that, because then that's too much work on me. We still got to get the pictures back. Like having when we had the football media day, that was that Sunday. They played the next week, and we had like over 150 players that year, and it took 4 people to put those headshots on the website, and it took almost a week and a half to do it. Like that was one of the most stressful times in the office. Like food couldn't cheer me up. Nothing could cheer me up that day. I was like, I can't, my head is about to explode. So that goes into my next question. With being a young professional, how do you continue to present yourself and not put yourself in that age gap to say like, I'm too young, maybe they won't listen to me, or maybe I should get someone else who's older to answer that question. And Bryce, I'll go ahead and start with you.
Yeah, that's a really good question. It, in my experience, that can be sometimes a little bit of a tricky thing. I'll use an example. Last year, one of our coaches disagreed with me on a ruling during a contest that I made, and during a stoppage, they actually came behind the press box and yelled at me through the door of the press box and was like, "That should have been ruled the other way. Like, we've got to do that. We just talked about something about this." And you know, I was I was within my first 2 months here at Guilford, so I was very new. I was very, you know, they didn't have an idea of how I operated yet. I didn't have an idea of how they operated yet, and so after the fact, I talked to them after the game, and I was like, "Hey, like next time, first off, please don't yell at me. Second off, you know, let's save it for after the game. Let's, if you want a ruling change, I can take a second look at it. I'm happy to take a second look at something after the fact." And that coach and I, we've had a great rapport since. We have not had any issues in remotely close to that. I think the other part of it is we are young professionals, and so we are sometimes as very close to the age of the student athletes that we are covering. Um, Sometimes we want to go out and we want to have a social life every once in a while. Imagine that, right? Just be very cognizant of not putting yourself in a situation where um, respect could be lost. Um, you know, because respect isn't demanded, it's earned, right? So just be very cognizant of the situations you're putting yourselves in, both in the workplace and outside of it. And kind of just the other part of it, I think, is it comes back to the presence of being around, being present, being aware of what's going on, and cultivating that relationship over time. And I think they'll be able to recognize what you're trying to build if you make progress in building it.
Amen. And Chris, how do you present yourself?
Yeah, I like what Bryce said, just being present. I think the more you're seen, the more you're visible. I think that paired with showing what your value is. I think once those two things become visible to everybody, I think age kind of doesn't really matter at that point. Doesn't mean it's not there, but I feel like it's a little less noted. Um, I think too, especially in a department that has people of all ages, people that have been there for years, people that haven't been there for years. I think listening to perspectives of people who have been there, who've been around, learning from them, actually taking advice while providing your fresh perspective that they probably are going to. I know just in my particular situation as a designer, it's a relatively new field, especially within college athletics, I think. So it's still seen as this kind of weird, exciting new thing that sports information kind of loves to be around. So while also taking their perspectives of how they used to do graphics back in the day or things that they would pick up on, just looking at their old yearbooks, getting ideas from that, like just little things like that. I think is kind of a good way to bridge that gap while everyone understanding that we're young, there's stuff that we're gonna do better just because of that.
And to Miss 30 under 30, take us home with how you present yourself.
Thanks for the shout out. Yeah, this question hits close to home. Even within my own team. I believe, if my math is correct, 5 colleagues, every single one of them is at minimum twice my age. And so I think I've had to work really hard to not only kind of, as Chris and Bryce touched on, sort of show my value. But I think also take comfort in the fact that I personally, in my own head, know I'm well educated, I'm well spoken, I'm knowledgeable, and I might not know everything, but I'm resourceful, and I'd like to consider myself a lifelong learner, even at my young, ripe age, right? Like I'm always learning and evolving, but aren't we all? Um, and the other half of that is remembering that you can't control the way that other people treat you. So, like, there's going to be a camp that sees your value as a young person, right? Who has a young, fresh perspective on innovative ideas and things that we can be doing to improve ourselves, and improve our culture and our student athlete experience, et cetera. But there's also always going to be a camp that's going to take one look at you and discredit your value and what you bring to the table, and that's just going to be what it is. Like, I don't want to sugarcoat that for anyone. That's the hard truth of it. But as long as you stay true to yourself and you know that you have something to offer, stay as professional as you can. Sometimes it's okay to just keep your head down and keep hustling. It's all going to be okay. You're not going to be the young professional anymore, and you can remember how you felt, and you can make sure that you're cultivating a culture that is uplifting to other young professionals.
I love that. That is amazing. So I don't see any open Q&As right now, which means it seems like this just started, but we are out of time. But I do want to give one last shout out to our panelists today, which again, Miss 30 under 30, Rebecca Ensing from 3C2A, Assistant Director of Operations, Bryce Johnson from Guilford, and Christopher Moore from USC, Southern California. And we'd like to give a big thanks to our presenters today because, first of all of you were rock stars. Y'all killed it. Y'all said so many things that really registered in my head. And with all of this, everything from the discussion and the insights, the way that the work of working collaboratively, it definitely was put out in a great light today. And I think with all of the colleagues on campus in your conference and those in the competitions, I think this would be something that people can use as future notes. As a reminder, we are recording this webinar and starting tomorrow on the CSC website and YouTube page. You can watch it as on demand session. We'll also offer it on numerous podcast channels. Please invite fellow CSC colleagues to listen and watch, especially with a great session like today. We encourage you to check our website out of collegesportscommunicators.com for updated information on what's on tap for CSC programming and continuing education. Thanks again for being with us today. I am Deshaun Bullock, the moderator and director of athletic communications at USC Upstate. We thank you all for tuning in, and we will see you at another time.